Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming on a Saturday afternoon when there is so many events all around the city. So there's, first of all, there's Ragorai, who's also in the city today, the photographer. We had a concert tonight at Amangati Singh Haveli. And before I forget, I already passing you the information that there will be an exclusive piano concert in the old city tomorrow afternoon at
evening 7 p.m.
7 p.m. Sorry, evening 7 p.m.
The invitation cards I'm putting outside.
And the invitation card will be put outside. That's a privilege for everybody in Ahmedabad to visit the old city and to attend the piano concert in the old city in a beautiful Haveli, and Rajiv Patel is there if you want more information after this talk. I'm starting the talk. You could notice that somebody is missing, Professor Vasavada, who was supposed to give this lecture today along with Rishi Singhal, and he was also supposed to speak with Dr. Sarah Keller at 7 o'clock this afternoon about the Indo-French project. Professor Vasavada got a very bad news, family, personal news, and he had to rush to Junagadh this morning, so sorry. Anyway, we have decided to not cancel everything, and we will improvise a little bit. But so first of all, let me introduce Rishi Singhal, photographer, professional photographer, who was approached by the French embassy of the time of Bonjour India. So Bonjour India, for those who remember, it's the festival of France in India organized by the French embassy every 2 years, and the last edition was beginning of 2013. It was happened in 15 cities all over India, and in Ahmedabad we welcomed 5 events during February and March. So France Heritage was one of the events, and 6 Indian photographers and 2 French photographers were deputed all over India to have a look at the French heritage in Gujarat. When we are discussing about the French in Gujarat, we are all thinking of Tamil Nadu, Pondicherry more specifically, and Chandernagor in West Bengal, when you had a strong French presence. But about Gujarat, it was a big question mark, and Rishi Singhal had the privilege to be deputed only for Gujarat. So when you type France, Gujarat, you don't have so much information on Google, except maybe Le Corbusier or the Indo-French project that Sarah was part of. So that was the first challenge for Rishi to find information. And Professor Vasavada was a big support at CEP to help him, because Professor Vasavada has an interest about French culture, and he knew quite well about the French heritage, which is not somehow very tangible. It could be also very much intangible, because you have a lot of the royal families of Gujarat who travel to France to study, and when they came back in Gujarat, they take with them a glimpse of the French culture in terms of town planning, in terms of furniture, interiors in their palace. So that Rishi will tell you more, and we'll try to explain a little bit what could be the next step of the project, how we could continue the project, because Rishi didn't have time to explore what could be explored in the city. So part of Bonjour India, we had also discussion on astronomy with the IIT Gandhinagar. After we had the France Heritage, we had a French Film Festival at Cinépolis. We had the Concerto for Sarod with Ustad Amjad Ali Khan and the French Symphonic Orchestra. You had the lobby, a huge picture about this event, and we had a talk on the French writer Albert Camus. So that's just to give you a glimpse of Bonjour India. Here is the catalogue, if you want to see about it between our 2 talks. And a specific catalogue, France Heritage, was printed on that occasion. So Rishi will also show you the catalogue. We'll discuss about the catalogue together. Unfortunately, we have only one copy at the Alliance and Rishi has his own copy, but it's available at the library in case you want to see. And friends, oh yes, before I forget, but that's only after the talk for the people who will stay also for the second talk. Since we are talking about photography and heritage, I have 20 copies of a set of Henri Cartier-Bresson picture of Ahmedabad during the year 1966. You all know that Henri Cartier-Bresson visited Gujarat several times, visited India in general, but spent some time in Gujarat with one of our founder member, Mr. Parmanand Dalwadi. I don't present Parmanand Dalwadi, everybody knows him here.
Dalwadi was there yesterday.
Dalwadi was there yesterday also for the talk with Mr. Doshi. So Henri Cartier-Bresson, I don't present him also. You have next to the elevator a board explaining a little bit the journey of Henri Cartier-Bresson in Ahmedabad. And Dalwadi was the assistant of Cartier-Bresson here in Ahmedabad, and after he traveled to France to work with Henri Cartier-Bresson in the Magnum studio. So if we have some photographer with us, that's a dream for everybody, I think, to work one day in Magnum studio. Is it your dream? Sorry. To work with Magnum? So whatever, we have 20 copies of the set. So for the quickest one, for the lucky ones, you might get a copy. So French Heritage in Ahmedabad, it was presented on February. And what a better place than to present it in the Le Corbusier building. So we share this heritage with the Swiss because it's a fight between Switzerland and France. Henri Cartier, Le Corbusier was born in Switzerland, but studied in France. He had a dual nationality, I think. So Switzerland took a big step saying that he's Swiss because they printed his face in the banknote of Switzerland. So now we have some difficulties to say that he was French, but still, it's okay, he's a European guy. So we presented that exhibition at Atma building. So I remind you that Ahmedabad has the highest concentration of Le Corbusier building in the world. Nowhere else in the world you have so many buildings. Chandigarh, it's an exception because he did all the town planning of Chandigarh. But in terms of construction, so we have Atma on Ashram Road, we have Sanskar Kendra in front of NID, and we have two private residents, the Shodans residence, which is not really available for the public to enter. It's really difficult even for us, for the French embassy and for Rishi. We had a difficult time to convince them to open their house. And the second is the one, yes, and the late Anand Sarabhai. So it was easy to visit that house. Now it's sort of closed. Let's see in the future. But if you have the occasion, it's just fantastic. So you could appreciate the gardens on the rooftop, the swimming pool that Le Corbusier has constructed with a slide going from the terrace, from the second floor directly to the pool. So they had some fun in that house. So for those who just joined us, again I passed the information that Professor Vasavada had personal bad news from his personal family and had to wish to leave to Junagadh this morning. So he won't be present. So we'll speak a little bit more about the French heritage after Rishi at 6 o'clock. Please stay because it's a great opportunity. We have Dr. Saxena, the head of the history department at MS University. Thanks again to be with us today. We will speak about the poles of Ahmedabad. That's the first talk of the poles in Ahmedabad at the Alliance Française. On January, we'll have the visit of Dr. Pierre Lachier, a French scholar from the École Française d'Extrême-Orient, French School for Asian Studies, and his field of work is the old city of Ahmedabad, and he's doing an anthropological study of a specific pole of Ahmedabad. So if you attend the talk of today, you will understand better the talk of January. And we'll finish by the Indo-French project in the old city of Ahmedabad with Kushisha, Dr. Sarah Keller, which used to happen during 1998 and 2005. So many things happened since 2005, but at least that was the beginning of a certain dynamic that it happened in the old city. And when we spoke about the UNESCO recognition for the first time, it was at that time. Now you have many people working on the old city, and it's good. Rajiv Patel is one of them. Yesterday we had Debashish Nayak from Ahmedabad University who were among us. So we'll continue to work all together, also with our Spanish friend, who are very active these days in the old city. And tomorrow, 11 o'clock, I just remind you that we have a rendezvous at the LD Indology Museum for a special guided tour by the director of the museum, Professor Parimou. And at 5 o'clock, we'll meet again here to attend the lecture by Rajiv Patel about these incredible initiatives in the old city of Ahmedabad. So just as an introduction, I will show you some picture of the exhibition, of the France Heritage exhibition that happened at ATMA. First of all, that's a Le Corbusier building. I consider it, and we could all consider that building as an heritage building because of all the rules attached. Yesterday we had the talk of the ASI, Archaeological Survey of India, the director of the Archaeological Survey of India, discussed about the perimeter that you have to respect around the building, what you can do inside a heritage building, what you cannot do. And to put an exhibition in such a building was not easy at all. It was a big difficulty, but to present it in a gallery, I mean a gallery, you know, it's natural like Goufa, the gallery of the Alliance Française, you have walls and that's it. But here that really adds, because you have to play with the architecture. So just few pictures, that was the day of the opening. So you could see we occupied basically the garden at the ground level, plus the first and the second floor of the building. So over there you have to manage electricity, how to bring lightning in this kind of building to give justice to every picture. How will you suspend that when it's really not allowed to nail inside the walls? How you respect the charm, sort of, and the sensitivity of the building? How do you play with lights? Because this kind of exhibition has to work during the daytime and also during evening time. But Rishi will add some more. That you could see, that was Rishi's picture already. That was on the first floor. And of course you have to manage the pigeons. Because if you know the ATMA building, you have openings all over, and how you secure these frames, which were very heavy, when you have the pigeons coming to sit directly on the frames.
Pigeons and also monkeys at times.
Yes, monkeys. So how to play with the outside, indoor, outdoor aspects of it. So that's again a picture of Rishi that was one of the large prints that we displayed in the garden and at the main column at the entrance of the building. That was Aneman, yes, who did a beautiful work in Hyderabad. Instead of clicking pictures of just of the building in Ahmedabad, he created this concept to put it as a stamp of the old times when the French presence was there.
And these are all French buildings in Hyderabad and Kapurthala.
Yes, so after now I will leave Rishi to do his presentation. And what could be interesting, since we have a lot of young people and a lot of people interested about architecture and cultural activities, we could see, and that is something Mr. Doshi spoke about, Rajiv is doing it also, how you bring cultural activities in the heritage part of the city or heritage building, because when we are talking about heritage, it's not talking about the past, it's talking about a culture, and culture, it's a dynamic notion, it's not blocked at a certain part of time. And cultural activities, it's a beautiful tool, basically, to bring people to connect the past, the present, and, in a sense, the future, to create something more lively, because Abhay Mangaldas asked, what is heritage for you? And a lot of people have this notion of heritage that you have to go in the museum, or it's places which are very dusty, which is not at all the true, basically. So, but that we could discuss later on. And also, if some people are aware or attended the Cotton Project between the University of London and Arts Rêverie, and maybe NID was involved also, I'm not sure, no, Ahmedabad University was involved with the London University. The Rajnagar Mills was opened almost 6 months or 7 months ago, and a lot of exhibition and cultural activities happened over there. So we have picture of that to illustrate how cultural activities could be there to talk about heritage. So, if you want, I can pass the slides for you.
No, I'm fine. I can sit there.
Yes.
I'll just do this. Hello, everyone. So I'll just start with some basic things, how I got into this project, or why this project came to me. I studied at CET. I'm not from Ahmedabad and I'm not from Gujarat. I'm from Delhi actually, but I studied in CET in the 90s, early 90s. And while I was studying there, and immediately after I graduated from CET, I had great opportunity to work with several conservation architects in Ahmedabad on projects which were in Ahmedabad and outside Ahmedabad. So I primarily worked with Professor Kulbhushan Jain on his project, for which he was doing conservation of Fort of Jaisalmer. So I did a lot of photo documentation for him, and this was starting from 1997 to 2002. And then I also worked with Professor Meenakshi Jain on conservation of Mehrangarh Fort in Jodhpur. So that was the time from where my concerns with photography and heritage started coming together. And in 2008, I did a residency in France, in Paris, during which I was looking at the immigrants to France from Southeast Asia, primarily the peninsula, the India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. And then last year in April, I was contacted by the embassy, and that was the time when they were formalizing this project, and they wanted me to come back to Gujarat because I had spent 9 years of my life studying, photographing, and being involved with heritage in Gujarat and around its boundaries. And at that time I thought, okay, I'll take it up. And I think as most of us do, the first thing I did was I checked on Google, and there was hardly anything that I could find which related the influence of French with the heritage in Gujarat. And I think most of us know, especially if you're coming from some historic background, of some background in history of the country, or for that matter, the colonial history, that French were the first to reach the shores of India, along with the British, which happened late, and the Dutch also, which we don't talk about as much. And the first port that the French landed in India was the port of Surat. And this is before Bombay. So I started finding people, experts, who would give me more information about the French presence in Surat. Because it's an established fact that French lived in Surat for quite a long duration. So I started looking at, some of these inns, or what I may call motels, where some of these officers would stay as they were beginning to colonize India. But I couldn't find any place. And I was told that, there were some buildings, there were some factories which the French had established, but today, none of them exist. Or even if there is one or two, I could not find any. So again, I was a little nervous that I've taken up this project, but I'm not finding anything. So anyways, as the research progressed, and there were several people who helped me. So I went to architects, I went to historians, I went to archaeologists, I went to people who are experts in conservation, and I think I spent about 6 months not photographing and just doing this research, where I would just call up somebody, take an appointment, go there, speak to them, and whatever work that I've done is actually accumulation of all these influences that I received through these people. And actually I've acknowledged all their names here. I don't want to read them out now, but it's here. So, and some of the people that I went to were actually people like Anand Sarabhai, because as we discussed, his house was designed by Corbusier. So sometimes there were some problems initially to approach the person, but it just worked out later. And Professor Vasavra especially was a great help. And through his direction, I started looking at some places in Saurashtra. Because Saurashtra is one such place which, and this I'm talking of pre-independence era, where it was dotted with several kingdoms, small kingdoms, and they were very rich, and they could very easily afford to send their children, princes, the young princes, to Europe to learn so-called etiquettes and European mannerisms. And this was, we should also keep this in mind that this was a time when people were beginning to oppose the British. So obviously the French became, one of the allies, because the people were fighting the British, or even if they were not fighting, the position that they had taken was anti-British. And that being said, Paris in the 18th century and more so in the 19th century started emerging as the city of culture. So a lot of these princes would go to Paris and study there. And sometimes they would end up living there for 10 years, 15 years, even 20 years in some cases. And when they would come back, it was difficult for them to come back to Saurashtra because they got so used to their lifestyle living in Paris. So what did they do? They brought Paris with them. So they started bringing whatever they thought was valuable or whatever they thought was in some ways embellishing their life, they brought it back to Gujarat. And what was it? It was their taste, either in food or in their environment. So be it architecture, be it how they would decorate their spaces, their interiors, and the way they would conduct themselves, including planning of some cities. And I think I'll talk about it in detail as I start showing you the photographs. So, I think as we switch it off, the sequence got jumbled up a little bit. Okay, so I'm starting with photographs from Bardwan, which I think most of you know is a small town near Surendranagar. And does anyone know about its history? Anyone amongst the audience other than the historians and people who are experts? It bears a very, very strong French influence. And this, there are several stories, and I was not able to establish the truth in these stories, but as I entered and as I saw, it was very difficult for me to sort of remove myself or think that, okay, this is something which exists here and not somewhere in France, although it's like a time capsule, because this was built in the 19th century. So a lot of decor, the interiors, the spaces, they reek of that era, of years bygone, but they look like, or they feel like, very, very French. And I'll read out a passage from this note that I wrote at that time. Rajmahal Palace in Vardhan presents another case where the architecture of the palace borrows heavily from the French Baroque and Rococo styles. It was built by His Highness Shri Bal Singh Ji Jhala in 19th century after his return from France. He appointed a French architect and several artisans were invited from France to work on the palace. So the story goes that he invited some 100 artisans, workers from France, to work on the palace. Not just the architect, but even the skilled craftsmen, the laborers were from France. And there's a very interesting and in a very unfortunate story that goes that quite a few of them contracted malaria as they were working here. And at that time for them, because there was no notion of malaria in Europe, so they couldn't figure out what was happening. Some of them thought that they've got plague, and they abandoned their work and just vanished somewhere. So out of these 100 odd craftsmen who were working, more than 50 just vanished, and nobody till date knows where they went because they couldn't go back across the oceans. So some of them actually went inland, but there is no record where they went. Some of them obviously died of malaria and of other things, but others just vanished. And in fact, as you will see at some of the photographs, the ruler, he thought that since today it is very easy that, okay, if you have a local craftsman or a laborer, you show him or her a reference, either on internet or a printout that, okay, this is what I want. So you build it like this. But then, there was no such media support. So how would they, even getting photographs was not that easy. And if I'm talking of pre-19th century era, the photography was in its infancy and still not as prevalent. Sometimes people would make sketches and show, but so that is why, and since he had the money, so he thought best would be to bring people from there and build this. And so these photographs are from last year. So this is from December 2012. Is it okay, or should I dim the lights for you? Yeah, you can see. So this is their dining room. Can you see the details? This is a painting on the ceiling. And see, this was a time when nudes in painting were very common in Europe, but not as much in India. So, things like this sometimes would create some sort of issue in the courtroom, because people would say that, why would you want such a painting? And if you notice closely, the models in these paintings look very Indian, but the style is European. This is one of their mini kitchens for the caretaker. But you can see the wall, before the tiles were put up.
was very interesting. When I look at this photograph, I am reminded of when I reached this place, because there is no information. Maybe there is information now, but when I started the project, there was no such information. So I checked some maps. I took help of the locals. I reached there in a car, and there was this tall, dried grass. And I was like, where have I come? It looked very spooky. So I just parked my car, got out, and the whole palace was locked. But then there was, like usually we see in the movies, there was one door which was slightly open. So I peeked in and I said hello, and there was this echo, but no reply. And I was thinking that whether I should actually go in or not. And I don't know if Philip remembers, I had called you from there that, what should I do? And he's like, you take your call, whatever you think is right, do that. I was like, okay. So I started, and I got sort of so attracted by what I saw, because there was, do you remember that blue center court? This. So from one of the windows, I could see this, and this is lit by natural light, which is coming from the top. So although it was dark in the rooms, the corridor from distance was bright. And I was like, I should go in. I should try to figure out some way to get in. And as I was trying to get inside, somebody said, "Kya kaam hai?" I was like, I turned back, and this was the caretaker, and he was somewhere there, and he was seeing everything. But then he came, so I said, I want to photograph. He said, no, we don't allow that. Anyways, so I spoke to the great grandson of Mr. Jhala, and his name is Mr. Chaitanya Jhala, and now he's the businessman who is based in Bangalore, and he's into car racing, so is his son. So I said, can you give me his number? He said, okay. So I spoke to him, he said, no, we usually don't allow, can you come later? I said, no, I have this timeline and I have to photograph. And he was kind enough to say that, okay, you can do whatever you want to do today, and in any case, I'm coming to Rajkot day after. So I said, sure. So then I met him, and after I met him, he made the whole palace accessible to me. And I didn't stay there, but it was a great experience, middle of nowhere, and there are these this grassland, dried grass, and in the middle of that you have this insight. Still, the thing is that since they have this independent money, they are able to preserve it to this extent. Otherwise, things can be very bad. There's another interesting thing that he told me was, I was looking for a photograph. Can you see the drapery, the red, the carpets, and the curtains? So these were actually made in France and imported from there. For that, he actually set up, that's what his great-grandson told me, that the then ruler actually set up a small industry in France to build these things for this palace in Vardhaman. Okay, then we will move to another small town near Gondal, Doraji. Have you heard of it? Yeah? Yeah, is it? For me, it was not. So it's like, okay, Doraji, and this is something that I found out through Professor Vasavra. He said, you go to Doraji because that's one place which is based on town planning principles of Paris. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, the Paris, when it was redesigned, the turn of the 19th century, I don't know if most of you are coming from architecture background, but I can explain this to you, that like any of the Indian cities today, the cities in Europe also grew organically. That, as people from small towns, countryside started going to these cities, they started growing. But the way we understand them today, where everything is so well organized, happened much later. A lot of these things happened in these cities after the Second World War, but what I'm referring to in case of Paris happened in late 19th century, when the then mayor of the city, Baron Haussmann, he thought that since the city is growing and we want some organization, we want proper roads, we want proper infrastructure. So what he did, he started demolishing some of the old buildings and started creating a radial structure for the city where you have a city center and the city extends out. So along with that, what he did was he created spaces for public parks, for gardens, and very, very wide roads which could take vehicular traffic. And now in Dhoraji, I'll just read out this passage where the then ruler is borrowing from these planning principles of the city of Paris to recreate this mini Paris in Dhoraji. This is a small sleepy town between Gondal and Porbandar. Dhoraji went through major transformation in early 20th century. Its then ruler, His Highness Bhagwat Singh Ji, lived in France for many years and was so enamored by Paris that he replanned Dhoraji based on town planning principles of Paris by Baron Haussmann in the previous century. So there was hardly any vehicular traffic in Dhoraji when this was built. So just imagine that he's building this the early 20th century, 1920s. And there is no vehicular traffic there, but still he's making these 72 feet wide roads. And sometimes, we face these issues in our cities today. And just imagine how he's planning this 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago. And I don't know, I'm just imagining that perhaps he was already thinking that in future, the place will get congested. There'll be all kinds of vehicular traffic. But it's working beautifully. I was there, I didn't have any problem. As you can see, you can get a sense of, how wide these roads are, or the notion of public square. What is a public square? Where, a lot of activities are taking place outside, and the connection between the outdoors and indoors is very lucid. So, things can happen outside and then go in and come out. Like, you have cafes in Paris where, you set out chairs, people go out, have coffee or wine for that matter. This grid that you're seeing, this is how I had displayed my work during the exhibition, but also, now this is changing, as you can see, with modern development. The skyline of the city is changing. Now, when this ruler was alive, and this is before independence, at that time he had created urban bylaws that no building can go beyond a particular height. So unlike in today's day and age, where at times we don't have these bylaws, or even if we have, we try to sort of circumnavigate these bylaws. And during his era, this was a strict law. So nobody could build beyond a particular height. So there was a certain standardization at that time. So he laid 72 feet wide roads, street squares, vistas, and majestic buildings emulating the city of Paris. Now this is not that, but on the right side what you see is from that era. And on the left is what's happening now. So he made a very, very wide road from the train station to the city center. So usually, I think my experience has been in India that any city you go, near the train stations, it is extremely congested, right? The old city. Now in here, it works beautifully because these are such wide roads. So as you can see, this shot is from the train station. And as you can see, there are these auto rickshaws. I didn't see any taxi there, but there were some private cars. And there is no congestion. You can go into the city very conveniently. Okay. What does this look like? This looks very different from Dhoraji. So anyways, I'm moving to the modern influence of the French and to the city. Now I think we have already talked about it almost to death, that Corbusier was this great architect who designed these 4 buildings here in the city. And it's not a coincidence that it so happened, because immediately after Indian independence, this was the time when the policies, the government policies were such that they were looking at the development in a different way. Today also we are talking about the so-called development. Then also people were talking about development, and the then Prime Minister Nehru invited Corbusier to design the city of Chandigarh. And at that time, some of the, these Saints in Ahmedabad, and they were so rich, because I think all of you are aware of the past of the city of Ahmedabad. That, this was called Manchester of the East because of the textile mills. And some of these mill owners were so rich, they thought, okay, he's some great architect whom the Prime Minister has invited, so why don't we invite him to design our private bungalows? And Corbusier ended up designing 5 buildings in Ahmedabad, out of which 4 were built, and one of them, which was designed for Hati Singh, never got built for some reasons. But the buildings, I think we have already listed, the buildings of Corbusier. That this one that I'm showing you first is the Ahmedabad Textile Mill Owners Association, ATMA, as sometimes we call it. And is there anyone who has not visited this building amongst the gathering? If there are people who have not visited, try to go and see it. It's a great experience. Now, just a question that I have for you, since you are looking at it so intently. Do you see any differences from the palace that I showed you earlier, which also borrowed heavily from the French styles? And I listed those ones, Baroque and Rococo. And this is also borrowing from that style. So do you see any difference between the two? Yes, no?
It's more modern, like rational.
This is modern. And what is modern? Modern is something where the aesthetics is borrowed from the industry, or this is the post-industrialization style, where you don't need too much ornamentation. The form, or the shape is borrowed from the industry. So when you go to a factory, what kind of shapes do you see? These are rectangles or cylinders. So similarly, that style is being borrowed for this sense of aesthetics, or this style. And this is Sanskar Kendra, which is opposite National Institute of Design in Palati. This was initially built as a community place, but I think now dogs are having a good time there. But I think I quite like this, because I don't know, and no one has told me, but I was just thinking, and you can correct me if I'm completely off, that the way it is built, there are no boundaries. And in a way I can see a relationship to how the poles are, where a lot of activities happen outside the house, and the street itself becomes part of one's private space. So to some extent, the distinction between private and public diminishes. So, and I think somewhere someone is thinking about it. So in this case, the architect Corbusier, and also the people after Corbusier, who have to some extent tried to preserve the way it was built, although it is not in a very good shape at the moment. But still, fortunately they have not completely isolated it by building walls. So I quite like it that dogs could go in, or people could walk in, and nobody really stops you. So, or for that example, if you go to SEPT campus, I think now because of the security concerns, people are becoming sort of sensitized to these safety issues. But other than that, earlier, anyone could go in. So what a beautiful concept. Now we are moving on to Shodhan Villa, and owned by the Shodhans, and as Philippe has already said, that it was very, very difficult to access, because, and I understand that also because it's a private bungalow. So let's say, you know, it's just that it was designed by this famous man. So a lot of times, you know, researchers, academics, photographers want to go there, and it becomes sort of, you know, infringement of your privacy that, okay, why do you want to photograph my house? So maybe that's the sentiment that goes on in Mr. Shodhan's mind, but fortunately I was able to go there once, and then I sort of, sir, can I please come back again? He said, okay. So I made several visits and I was able to photograph it, and as you can see, this also bears a very, very strong modern influence. Now, along with the form, along with the shape, there's another thing that reflects its modernity, and that is there is no surface treatment of a different kind. So this is all exposed concrete, you know, so the material is showing, right? Usually what happens, we build something, then we cover it. Either we put a plaster, or then we put POP, then we put some nice paint. I'm not saying that it's not good, but here what I'm trying to point out is the modernity, the modern sensibilities dictate that the material should remain truthful to its function. This is, okay, that was Shodhan. This is again Sanskar Kendra. Back to Shodhan. Also, the colors that the architect chose. Fortunately, Shodhans have maintained the same color scheme over the years. Usually, it so happens that, you know, we think that, okay, you know, the architect is gone. Now it's up to me to do whatever I want to do. This is my house. But here, because one, Shodhans recognize that, you know, it's designed by Corbusier, who's an important person and who had these strong sensibilities. So even the colors that you see are modern colors. That is, these are, you know, these are not the mixed colors. You see the green, the reds, the blues. I think of all these 4 buildings, then I could not access the Sarabhai's house. Although I went there, I spoke to Mr. Sarabhai, Anand Sarabhai. This was before he passed away, earlier this year. And he was very open to my going there and photographing, but then unfortunately he passed away and his family members were not as open. Now out of these 4 buildings, my experience was that Sanskar Kendra was in very bad shape. Because, I don't know, maybe that's the only building which is with the government. The Textile Mill Owners Association building is being taken care of by the Atma representatives, and then the other 2 are private bungalows. But Sanskar Kendra, which is actually with the government, is in a very bad shape. I hope that, you know, someday someone recognizes that and does something before it's too late. This is all Shodhan Villa. Okay, so that's the last image I wanted to show you. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
In the Shodhan house, even the furniture has been designed by Lakshmi.
Correct. Thank you.
They have still maintained it.
Yes, yes, yes. Do you want to show the
No, it's okay.